The Avg Pay script flow goes as follows, and it is a little more complex than some of the scripts. What we're going to do initially is start with the paid invoice table, the table we normally use, and we summarize on the vendor number so that we can get a total invoice amount field. But what we also get whenever you do a summary is a count field so that you could divide the total amount by that count to create a calculated average field. Once that calculated average is obtained by vendor, now summarized, I have a vendor number that I can join back to the original paid file to create this joined file. And the joined file, I name it as such because it's something I will normally erase later. And then I will extract invoices that exceed a multiple of whatever the user put into the system, and it will then calculate that multiple and say, this invoice in the paid file is, let's say, 5 times greater than the average for that vendor. So I find this to be a very powerful test in that you can identify the above average payments by vendor and very quickly get to ones that just look strange. As we move into ACL, it's probably easiest to first summarize the file and walk through the steps that we just saw in the flow. So if I summarize on vendor number, accumulate the invoice amount, and do this to a new file, let's just call this sum for right now, I now have the vendor number, invoice amount, and count. I now can divide the invoice amount by the count by creating a calculated field. So I'll go to my edit table layout, and I'm adding this new expression or calculated field, and let's just call it average amount. And now in the default value, I will take the invoice amount divided by the count. And while this does verify it's a valid expression, I'm a big believer in adding some decimal places to the equation, and I find that this is one of the easier ways to do it, to essentially add these decimal places here, and we're going to add them there. And what I find in ACL is it's a really good idea if you ever do calculations and you want things to be, say, to a third digit or even 2 digits, that you add this type of calculation where you add the parentheses marks, the multiply, and the 1.000 in this case, but you could go out to 6, 7 decimal places. That's fine. It's just a matter of you need to actually specify it with that multiplication that we're showing here. Now, what could happen is that as I select OK and now add that column to this section here, what can happen is you can get this average amount of 0 or division into 0 or by 0. I don't think you can actually get a division by 0 because the count will always be greater than 1 or equal to 1. But when we look at the values, I always think it's a good idea to just go back into that expression of that average amount, and just for safety's sake, go into the conditions, and you could add a condition by clicking on this button, or you can double click, but we'll just click here. And in the condition, I'm going to say if the count equals 0.000 or the invoice amount equals 0.000. Again, I'm staying consistent with my decimal places. I'm going to put 0.000, and that way if any of these values in the numerator or denominator equals 0, then just make this value 0 as opposed to doing any division, and it gets you around any sort of division by 0 issues that ACL may have. I can now do a statistics on this column just by selecting Analyze Statistical Statistics. And again, I'm not going to get any sort of division by 0 issues or anything like that. And you can get some averages here, and it's sometimes interesting even to look at the average of the averages, and that is what I'm doing here, and also some of the high values and low values. So as we now go back and have the summary file, I want to open up the paid invoice file, and I'm going to join it to that sum file. And I will join it on vendor number, and I will then select in the primary, I'll select everything. And in the secondary, I'm now just going to select that average amount field. I mean, I suppose I could also bring over the invoice amount field as well as a total amount for that particular vendor and the count, and that would also provide me the number of invoices for that vendor. So it is sometimes useful to have that. We'll select that as well. Just for argument's sake, I like to select all primary, but just the sheer fact that I've saved everything as a summary to the summary file, when I join the paid file to the summary file, it will join without exception. So I'm going to do this to a file called joined, and we'll select OK, and that's OK. And now I have joined. If I look at the log file and just take a look at this join file, there are 0 primary records unmatched as we expected. And as we go back to the file itself and scroll all the way over to the right, we can start to see the average amount, the total invoice amount, and the count. So let's just add the initial invoice amount field. So this was the value per the paid file for this particular vendor. This was the average amount for that vendor. This is the total amount. And that's the count. So, one confusing point is this will be known as invoice amount field. This will be known as invoice amount 2. You might want to just change it in the column title as well. It just makes it a little easier. You could also in the column title just put it as total invoice amount, and we don't even need the 2 at that point. And that'll work as well to explain what the items are. This would be obviously total transactions. And now that we have these columns, we can easily start taking a look at where the average amount, which let's just format that so it's a little easier to read, where the average amount may be greater than some of these items. And here's a great example of where the average amount is $1,402, yet this $10,000 is well above that average and multiples higher. Let's just take a quick look at the log. Something new for version 9 of ACL is that when you do define a field, it will, if you will, walk you through the definition, and that'll actually get saved into the log itself. And it's something that used to not happen, but now it's there. It's very useful, and I just wanted to note that's where we did some of that work. And going back to the actual program now itself, we can run the actual Avg Pay program by right-clicking it and clicking the Run button. So it will obviously find these excessive amount fields. We're going to select paid invoice file, invoice amount, and vendor number so that we have those 2 fields selected. It's then going to ask us what multiple, and in this case I'm going to put 5 in there just because, so it's 5 times the actual average. If that invoice is, it'll extract it. We hit OK, and it says unusual large vendor invoices have been extracted. As you scroll over to, I'm just going to carry this way over to the right here, not only do we create an average amount, but we multiply that by 5 to get a multiple amount, and there's that 10,000 one, but there are others that it now found. And again, from 729 items, 18 items now kick out, which is a very small population. And the reason they're weird is because they're weird in relation to that vendor. So that's even more of a good reason to select it, as opposed to it just being an above average for the entire file. So this should be a good test in identifying some very strange large invoices in your data.